One, breaking news. Completing the Fox and Friends weekend trifecta, I have been named, after Pete Hegseth was named Secretary of Defense and Sean Duffy, Secretary of Transportation, I have been named the Secretary of Common Sense. I have been named the Secretary of Sports, the Ambassador of Texas. Last man standing. Welcome to Fox and Friends Weekend. I'm your host, Will Cain. 2, is Joe Biden trying to bait us into a war before the presidency of Donald Trump? And is the appointment of Pete Hegseth as Secretary of Defense and Michael Waltz to the national security establishment a disaster? We break that down with someone who has some questions, comedian Dave Smith. 3, Indiana or a two-loss team from the SEC? We have got to break down the logjam of two lost teams in the Southeastern Conference. It is the Will Cain Show, streaming live at foxnews.com, on the Fox News YouTube channel, on the Fox News Facebook page, terrestrial radio, market to market across this great United States of America, and always on demand by subscribing at Apple or on Spotify. If you're watching a stream on YouTube, there's a text link underneath this live stream. Inside, there's a little bit of a button there, says subscribe to the Will Cain Show. We hope you will do so. That way, you'll set a reminder and know that every Monday through Thursday at 12 o'clock Eastern Time, you can join us right here. Drop into the comments section and become a member of the Willisha. Sean Duffy, husband to my co-host, Rachel Campos Duffy, your new Secretary of Transportation. Fellas, I don't know how much longer we have together. The clock might be ticking, but I'm waiting for my cabinet appointment. The only real question is what's left or what am I most suited for? Attorney General? Taken. Solicitor General? Filled.
Labor?
I have asked people on social media. Most people suggested Secretary of Common Sense. There's got to be a new position.
I like that.
At one point it was the Republic of Texas, perhaps an ambassador to Texas.
What about something high up in Doge?
Working for Elon Musk.
Cutting through
red tape and bureaucracy. One would suggest I'm probably not doing a good job of that at Fox News, but I'm not ready to work 80 hours a week at minimal pay, as that job has been advertised by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. No, instead, I'm wanting to build a powerhouse right here at foxnews.com on the Fox News YouTube channel. However, I just witnessed a real powerhouse. Guys, today I'm broadcasting to you live from northern Alabama, from basically a cotton field. And everyone knows that I'm a cotton farmer from West Texas. But I'm watching real cotton farmers here in Alabama. And pick their cotton, grow the cotton, take it from seed to store. It's an incredible operation here, Redland Cotton. But I spent yesterday in Florida. I did the Patrick Bet David show. And I got to tell you, three, you members of the Willisha, we have a ceiling to reach, and we are not yet there. We know that. But it is an impressive operation. I'm talking about massive studio space, people working, an incredible show they're putting on there at PBD. And we got into it yesterday a little bit. We started talking about my friend and my former co-host, Pete Hegseth, our new nominee for Secretary of Defense. And I laid out what I think is happening in the media and what I think needs to happen. And I think there needs to be an army of lawyers waiting on that wall. Watch. He is a real friend of mine, not a TV friend. I have said, when I'm done here on this planet, I want him to be one of the guys that carry my casket. Now, because I'm not objective, though, or that I have a bias, doesn't mean I'm wrong. Because of this, I know the truth about Pete Hegseth. And this is an incredible, incredible man with the right values, a flawed man who's made mistakes in his life, but a good man who wants to live up to his values and has principles and dearly loves the United States of America. This tattoo issue is nothing short of defamatory. And I'm waiting for the army of lawyers to start attacking the mainstream media for what, look, I'm an attorney. I went to law school. For a public figure, the standard is malice or reckless disregard for the truth. That is malice. That is malice. That tattoo, as I go on to explain, is the Jerusalem cross on his chest, something that's been around since 1096. Something's been around since the Crusades. And the tattoo of Deus Vult on his bicep means God wills it. Unless something's happened in the last 1,000 years to erase a millennia, because somebody appropriated a symbol on the internet, not unlike the OK symbol, which turned into the circle game, and then somehow through the internet rabbit holes turned into a sign of white supremacy. Unless we've erased Christian history, that is what is tattooed on Pete Hegseth. And for someone to not know that or to pretend otherwise, to me, is nothing short, as I mentioned, of malice. That's the standard for defaming a public figure, and I am waiting for the army of lawyers. I actually think, fellas, that message is starting to get through. That fear is starting to be felt in mainstream media, and well, it should be. I think that we have seen some instances in the last couple of weeks where clearly there's been a memo go out, perhaps at ABC, perhaps at CNN, and definitely at The View. Because I want you to watch something that happened the other day on The View as Sunny Hostin was talking about Matt Gaetz' appointment to Attorney General. I want you to watch what she said and then what she was clearly forced to say minutes later on The View.
How could you nominate someone with allegations of child trafficking trafficking across state lines and having sex with a 17-year-old? My understanding further on in the interview, they discussed the fact that once he finds out that she's 17, he stops having sex with her.
Hey, Sonny, you have a legal note.
I do have a legal note. Thank you, Whoopi. Matt Gaetz has long denied all allegations, calling the claims, quote, invented, and saying in a statement to ABC News that this false smear following a 3-year criminal investigation should be viewed with great skepticism. That DOJ investigation was closed with no charges being brought.
We'll be right back.
That is incredible.
I had to leave that in.
We'll be right back. The look on her face. Sunny Hostin looks like she's been sucking on a lemon drop. Like she just ate something that rotted a few months ago. She was clearly forced to issue that statement, and she is none too happy about it. Reads all over her eyes in the way that she holds her mouth. But I'm telling you guys, listen, as I said in that clip, I'm not objective. I have my bias. I'm friends, very good friends with Hegseth. But what has happened in the media, and I would argue now for several years, it's gotten out of control. The executives have lost control of people speaking beyond irresponsibly, recklessly, and I think in many cases, as I mentioned, with malice. And it's going to take some defamation suits. It's going to take this army of lawyers to rein this back in. We've long lost the truth. We're now in full-on propaganda. And we're defaming human beings with whom you disagree. But I'm not going to let that happen. This is a real friend. I'm not going to let that happen to Pete Hegseth. I think this will be a fascinating conversation. We'll talk about Matt Gaetz. We will talk about our future Secretary of Defense with Dave Smith, who's had some fascinating debates with Chris Cuomo on Patrick Bet-David a little bit later here in the Will Cain Show. But let's get started now with story number one. The left, I think, has now been baited into one of their worst positions, a weakness. They've been baited into insanity. Congresswoman Nancy Mace has championed a new bill that would force men to use the men's restroom on Capitol Hill. There is a transgender congressman from Delaware who has been elected to Congress. This is a man who has transitioned into a woman. Well, there's quite some question, obviously, about where that person will use the restroom. Nancy Mace has said, not in the women's restroom. This has caused social media and mainstream media to absolutely lose their mind over the last 48 hours. And in doing so, lean into their worst instincts, lean into insanity. Yeah, I had this conversation yesterday with a friend on the left about this issue. Transgender. And what I tried to communicate to her is I think I can speak for what I would assume is a largely held position on the right. I don't care what you do. I don't care what you do with your life. I don't care how you choose to live your life. The problem is when your choices in life begin to dictate the reality of others. This is the issue when it comes to sports. Of course, there's empathy to be had for individuals and what they're going through, and maybe even empathy for the choices they make and how they choose to live their life. But that empathy can't become a distortion of objective reality and the imposition on the rest of society to live in another's delusion. Even if driven through empathy, you don't have to live in a subjective reality. To allow this congressman transition to a woman, to use the women's restroom, prioritize putting one person's empathy, one person's situation over the discomfort and empathy towards every other woman elected to Congress. And if the left keeps running down this rabbit hole and having a fight, not over how someone lives their life, but how they force others to live their life, that's the debate over pronouns. What do I have to call you? That's the debate over sports. Where do I have to let you play? That's the debate over bathrooms. What space do we have to share? If you keep chasing this in, you're going to keep alienating. If the left keeps chasing this, they're going to alienate the entire country. They're going to alienate America. Because while we are tolerant and even empathetic or loving towards how others want to live their life, it ends when you force your choices on the rest of America. My guest today on the Will Cain Show is a comedian. He's also the host of a very successful podcast. He's been an incredible debater on several venues, from Piers Morgan to Patrick Bet-David. And perhaps his most famous debate was one he had on Patrick Bet-David's podcast, where he got to come face-to-face with one of the media's, I think, biggest offenders of objective reality and truth. And even if he's gotten on his own and corrected the course slightly, he can't just walk away from what he's done in the past. I'm talking of CNN's Chris Cuomo. Dave got face-to-face with Chris Cuomo some months ago to talk about the positions that Cuomo held on COVID. It was incredible. It was justice. Watch.
Apologize me. I don't know what I'm talking about.
What do you want me to apologize for? For telling people to take the vaccine?
Okay, let's just stick with Joe Rogan. For mocking and smearing a person from the #1 show at CNN and then years later admitting he was completely right about what he said. How is that not attached to an apology? If I ever smeared someone aggressively and then 2 years later I had to admit that I come out and just say what you said to Pat on his podcast was exactly what Joe Rogan was saying this whole time. You go, first of all, it's not horse dewormer, it's used on people, it's very safe, and my doctor prescribed it to me. That's why I'm taking it. Yes, if I ever did that to someone, I would apologize for that.
But it's not the right context. And first of all, it's both, right? It's veterinary grade and human grade. I was not making a market.
Which one do you think Rogan was taking?
I hope he was taking the human grade if he was prescribed it.
Which one do you think Joe Rogan, who just signed his second $200 million deal, was taking? Do you think he was stealing it out of the cat bowl, or do you think he had a doctor
I'm sure they prescribed it.
So then you guys were all wrong for demonizing him.
Not just wrong. In the same case as I'm talking about with The View and Matt Gaetz, or the controversies over Pete Hegseth, not just wrong, malice, defamation in that case of Joe Rogan. Let's break all this down with Dave Smith. We're going to ask him about that moment with Chris Cuomo because Cuomo has come back. He called Dave a third-rate comedian. Let's get into that coming up next on The Will Cain Show. Is the appointment of Pete Hegseth, Mike Waltz, Marco Rubio, and Tulsi Gabbard a disaster? I better be ready for that debate with the man who took on Chris Cuomo. It is the Will Cain Show, streaming live at foxnews.com, on the Fox News YouTube channel and the Fox News Facebook page. Terrestrial radio, market to market, always available on Spotify or on Apple. Hit subscribe and also subscribe on YouTube. Joining me now is the host of Legion of Skanks, and part of the problem, he's also a stand-up comic. He's been here on the Will Cain Show several times. I've always enjoyed having the conversation. It's Dave Smith. What's up, Dave?
Well, thanks for having me.
I'm glad to have you, even if you are a third-rate comedian, Dave. You know, you've now received the rebuttal. We just played your skewering, face-to-face, so sweet, pure justice with Chris Cuomo. But you've now received the rebuttal, Dave. Let's play it for everyone watching at home.
The idea that the guys that you see as just a level of talent, you're going to have better talent enter the space. Instead of like Dave Smith, who's like a second, third tier comedian, you'll have Louis C.K. You'll have Sebastian Maniscalco. You'll have Stephen A. Smith. You'll have Kevin Hart. You'll have A-level talent that wants to enter the space and start owning these constituencies. You know, Benny Johnson, Ben Shapiro. This is not A-level talent.
Dave, what do you have to say about or to Chris Cuomo?
I mean, I don't know. I'm fine with him saying that. Saying like I'm a third-rate comedian compared to Louis C.K. is like, that's like Jordan. Like, okay, sure. It's like telling an NBA player like you're no Michael Jordan. Like, yeah, they all know that. I mean, maybe it's an insult to LeBron James, but it's not an insult to like anybody else in the league. Chris Cuomo is a third-rate Cuomo. Like he's not even one of the best Cuomos up there. So I don't know. You know, I think that Chris doesn't really understand this environment. Like Louis C.K. is one of the greatest comedians who's ever lived. The idea that him or Kevin Hart are going to come in and take over the podcasting space, this is like when you see MSNBC saying they need to create their own Joe Rogan or something like that. It's like you don't really get that what you guys do will not translate to what Joe Rogan does. There is no woke progressive who's going to go dominate the podcasting scene. And so I don't know. You know, I think he's got some bitter feelings toward me. I've said some not too kind things about him before, and that's fine. But I think he totally misunderstands this space. And as I've seen in all of the kind of election postmortems, nobody in the corporate media world seems to get it. They're, you know, the closest they'll come is like, oh, I think we went a little too woke, or maybe the trans kid thing isn't as, you know, doesn't play as well with voters as possible. But the point is that the entire establishment of the legacy media is just so corrupt that people were looking for people who call out that corruption. You know, I've seen it like characterized as a right-wing space. I was just listening to, I think on The View, they were saying, oh, it's just the right-wingers have, or no, it was that lady from CNN was saying, the right-wingers have these big platforms, but Joe Rogan isn't a right-winger, and Glenn Greenwald isn't a right-winger. Jimmy Dore isn't a right-winger. What they all have in common is that they call out the blatant, undeniable corruption of the establishment. And if you're not willing to do that, then you're never going to succeed in this space. That's just what it is.
I don't know what he's talking about, A-listers joining this space. I think that the better analogy he might need to wrap his head around, it's a little bit like saying, wait till Charlie Chaplin takes on the talkies. He's going to push out all these voice actors. It's right. Moved on, man, because of what you're talking about. And it's moved on for what you did in that moment. Look, you and I've gotten to be, you know, I have gotten to be judicious about when I use the word friend. You and I have never even met in person. We're friendly, you know. I am truly friends with Pete Hegseth, and we're going to get into that in a moment, our future Secretary of Defense. But you and I are friendly, but that doesn't have anything to do with the fact that when I give you this compliment, it is 100% genuine. What you did was absolutely amazing there with Chris Cuomo. You did an amazing job debating him, but you did it to his face. And I'm taken over by curiosity, Dave. Like, what was it like after that? Like when they cut the cameras at PBD, what was the interaction with Chris Cuomo?
It was actually fine. You know, we didn't interact much, but we spoke for like a few minutes afterward. It was me, him, and Patrick Bet-David, and it was like I think Pat brought up the UFC, and then we just started talking about fighting briefly. It was I kind of felt like I left it out there. I got furious during the debate, but afterward I did. You know, I think Chris knew what happened, and he knew how it was going to go, and you know, he had kind of accepted that going in. But it wasn't. I'll give him credit for that. He wasn't like he wasn't nasty to me or anything. After the debate, he did. The more interesting thing to me was before the debate. I only met him like 30 seconds before we went on, and he came in like we were at a funeral. Like, he just seemed defeated before we started the thing. And I think the big part of it is that he just knew, like, his track record on COVID is just, it's indefensible. And so he didn't really know what to do in the debate. So he figured he would just kind of pretend he had never said all of the stuff that he said. And Patrick Bet-David, he's got a real good team of people behind the control boards there. And they had all the receipts of when he had said the stuff. Right. And so he was just left in a bad situation.
They had the receipts. And, you know, I'll give Chris a tad bit of respect for facing Patrick Bet-David. But I think that you're absolutely right to call him out. You don't just get to pivot. You don't get to not face what you did, because what you did was what you were talking about a minute ago, Dave. It was corrupt. I mean, to tell those lies about Rogan and at large about COVID was corrupt. And I think that's part of what I want to talk to you about today, because I made that argument yesterday on PBD that what we're seeing in many of these cases, and I think we saw it with that clip from Sonny Hostin dealing with Matt Gaetz, is beyond stupidity. It truly is. It's not simply reckless disregard. It's not mistakes. It's not opinionating. It is really malicious defamation. And I do think there has to be some accountability mechanism at some point. But let's back into some of those conversations, because you're an interesting voice to talk about what's happened in the last 48 hours. Joe Biden authorizes the Ukraine to use American missiles for long-range strikes on Russia. I think I heard this morning that the UK has done the same. Ukraine has fired UK manufactured missiles long-range to Russia. The timing of this is obviously very, very suspect when Donald Trump has positioned himself as someone who's going to come in and negotiate a peace. And yet here we have the world powers, including Joe Biden, seemingly, I don't know, Dave, throwing a Hail Mary before their war in Ukraine is over, like this one last ramp up before it possibly could receive a peace under Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, it's so reckless and outrageous and just unprecedented, and on multiple levels, right? So, I mean, we had an entire Cold War with the Soviet Union from the end of World War II all the way up until at least 1989. And you know, during this time, this was like the rise of the neoconservative hawks, and the thinking in Washington was, we're under this emergency. There's this evil ideology of communism that is hell-bent on world domination. And so we have to fight wars in Vietnam and Korea, you know, proxy wars in Nicaragua. Wherever we got to go, we have to roll back communism. And look, I disagree with the Cold Warriors, but at least there was some truth to that. I mean, there was the Soviet Union. They did have aspirations of world domination. But even then, we never had a policy this reckless. We always knew that we couldn't actually fight a direct war with the Soviet Union, with Russia, because we were both nuclear superpowers. And that's that people understood the profound risk to humanity of doing that. So number one, fighting this proxy war on Russia's border for the last few years has been like more reckless than anything we ever did with the Soviet Union, which was obviously more of a threat than Putin's Russia. And then on top of that, I've just never seen anything like this before, where for all the people who say they believe in democracy so much, well, the people just spoke and they voted against this regime that's been funding this proxy war. And they voted overwhelmingly for the guy who says he wants to negotiate an end to the war, which,
what
by
do you
the way,
think
Vladimir
they're doing?
Putin. Well,
what do you think this is?
You know, I don't know. I mean, I think that you've got, I mean, they haven't been confirmed by the Senate yet, but you've got the prospect of Tulsi Gabbard being the boss of the intelligence community and Matt Gaetz being the boss of the Justice Department. And these were the mechanisms by which they launched the whole, Russiagate hoax when Trump first won. So they don't have those tools potentially anymore. And maybe this is the game to try to get a provocation out of Vladimir Putin and then try to get Donald Trump stuck in this war where he won't be able to pull out. I don't know. Maybe they're trying to get him to, kind of come out and intervene in some way now in the lame duck session and try to throw the Hatch Act at him or something like that. I don't know. But it is such a dangerous game to play. And I think Donald Trump's video response that he put out the other day was designed to be a signal to Putin and to Zelensky to just be like, hey, Vladimir Putin, don't overreact to this because a new administration's coming in 2 months, and to let Zelensky know also that you better not take up Joe Biden on this because you're not going to have unconditional support going forward. Hopefully that's enough.
I think that I would hope that Zelensky and Putin understand that about Donald Trump. That's an interesting theory about let's not try to provoke Putin. Let's try to provoke Trump into stepping in to stop this escalation. And then you come after Trump for the Hatch or Logan Act because he's not supposed to negotiate with foreign leaders until he becomes president, not president-elect. But I do want to get into this with you. You have said that you are concerned. You're a very big fan of Tulsi. You just mentioned Matt Gaetz. I know you're a fan as well, and we'll talk about him, RFK. But you have your concerns about Marco Rubio. You have your concerns about Mike Waltz. And I've heard you voice your concerns about my friend and former co-host, Pete Hegseth. In fact, you've gone to say that it's a disaster. Why do you think these appointments are a disaster?
Well, to be clear, I said Rubio is a disaster. And I would throw Waltz in there too as a disaster. Look, these are people who have a long history of being absolutely married to the neoconservative, neoliberal consensus on foreign policy and have supported every one of the absolute catastrophic, disastrous wars of the last 25 years. Now, to your guy, Pete Hegseth, who I am, to use your distinction, friendly, but not really friends with, but I have met him at Fox News before. And I do think he's a very smart and capable guy. And I do think he's honest. I remember very vividly, he did this one segment, this was many years ago on Fox News, where he was asked about his time in Afghanistan, and he just started openly talking about the epidemic of the warlords that we're propping up raping little boys. And I was like blown away by the honesty. Like, I mean, I was well aware of this, but nobody ever talks about it. And so it was like, and I also think he's had some really good rhetoric on Ukraine. Like I've heard him make very good points on that policy. And it seems to me that he was kind of a guy who did support the Cheney-Bush foreign policy, but has re-examined that. So I don't know. He's a little bit more of a question mark to me, and we'll see what ends up happening. I just think that, look, the entire Donald Trump America First movement from 2016, when he looked at Jeb Bush in the eyes and told him, your brother lied us into war, has been that there's been a rejection of this foreign policy, and for good reason. I mean, who could, in the last 25 years, we've had major military conflicts and wars all throughout the region. I mean, in Afghanistan and Iraq, obviously, in Pakistan, in Syria, in Yemen, in Somalia, in Libya. And what they all have in common is that they were just absolute disasters, like catastrophes. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of innocent dead people, trillions of dollars wasted, the region destabilized, and our bravest young men left wounded or injured or committing suicide by the tens of thousands. I mean, like, what policy could be more of a disaster than that? I can't think of anything else. And I'm against almost every government policy, but you'll have conservatives who will like rant about what minimum wage laws have done. Like, oh, okay, yeah, they're pretty bad, but what about this? And now we're fighting two proxy wars, one with the biggest nuclear power in the world and another just in the biggest hotbed area of the world where there's looming threats of conflicts with Iran and Hezbollah and the Houthis and for what? Like, I'm sorry, but the overwhelming burden should be on you, advocate of any of these wars, to demonstrate very clearly how this is in America's interest, except they can't do that because it's not. And so what they do is just smear Tulsi Gabbard as a Russian traitor or something like that for daring to question any of them.
We'll get into Tulsi in just a moment. Sure. I share two things with you. I feel like, first of all, our integral position as a citizenry should be skepticism towards power, even if your friends are in power. You should have a level of skepticism towards any power. Second, once that power wants to do something with its power, we should be requiring them to articulate to us why it is in the interest of America, America first. Let me, though, then offer you, if not a defense, a perspective on what I think about all of those individuals. And I'm going to give you three quick ones. I know Michael Waltz, not as well, but I know Mike Waltz. I definitely have sat on a couch and have known him for a decade in Pete Hegseth. I do think, one, Dave, there has been an evolution in many people's points of view over the past 5 to 10 years when it comes to foreign policy. I do think in many of those instances, it's an honest recalculation. Does that mean it's one that you can count on into perpetuity? No, but I do think it's honest. Two, I think that there is a utilitarian effect to Donald Trump. So I've seen you tweet about this, and nobody within Trump world likes him anymore, but there was a utilitarian role to John Bolton. And Trump's talked about it, and it's pretty funny when he talks about it. But he's like, I'd sit down with these guys, and I've got this guy over here turning red in his face, and his mustache is blaring out, and his eyes are reading hatred. And the other worlders are going, oh my God, I think this guy wants war with me. And all of a sudden Donald Trump becomes good cop. Some neoconish instincts present, not driving, but present within this administration actually doesn't scare me, because I think you've also got Tulsi. You've also got these other power players in there, and I've seen you call it incoherent. I don't think – this is where I think sometimes I've had this debate with you, or I've moderated you with Ben Domenech. Like, libertarianism, sometimes its failure is puritanical. It's puritanical and utopic. And like, do you need everybody singing from the same script as Donald Trump? No, there's a utilitarian purpose to having different points of view in that room. And then finally, third, though, I do trust Donald Trump's instinct. He has been consistent in America first, and all of these people work for Donald Trump.
Well, okay, so there's a lot there. The first thing I would say is that a lot of times I think when we talk about government in general, we confuse the mythology with the reality. And so to say that all of these people work for Donald Trump, well, I mean, I don't know. In his first 4 years, all the people under him certainly did not work for him. And in fact, a lot of the people who worked for him framed him for treason, knowing that they were lying. And so, no, I don't think it's like...
Real quick, that's a fair rebuttal, a totally fair rebuttal that seems to be a priority to change this time around with Trump.
Now, that I agree with you about. And I think there's a reason why he put outsiders at, Tulsi and Matt Gaetz. Those picks really do. That's a symbol that he is thinking the way you're talking about. But I do look, I'm familiar with the argument that Trump's made. I think he's got it completely wrong. And the truth is that having John Bolton by his side didn't drive the North Koreans to the table because they were so scared of him. They came to the table. He brought John Bolton in, and it killed the peace talks. And there's, tens of millions of prisoners living under Kim Jong-un. It's a tragedy of our time that those peace talks didn't result in anything more. And, I just don't really buy this idea that as if the world hasn't gotten the message yet that America's willing to bomb some people, or as if Donald Trump himself, just from his first administration, doesn't have the street cred from all of the, from Soleimani and bombing Syria and backing the Saudis in their war against Yemen. I mean, I don't think you actually need to keep these war hawks in your cabinet just so that people are scared of what the crazy guy might do. I think that in his first administration, they were nothing but a net negative, and I think they're probably going to be a net negative again here. And, listen, your point about libertarianism being a little bit utopian, I think there are certainly libertarians who fall into that type of thinking. I don't think I'm guilty of that. I'm not arguing for none of this is utopian to me. I don't agree with Donald Trump on a lot of things. I don't agree with Tulsi on a lot of things. I don't agree with Matt Gaetz on a lot of things. But I do think that Tulsi is much better than the alternative would be there. And I think even better than Donald Trump's picks right now would be let's just have people who actually aren't war hawks, who believe in his vision. I mean, there are plenty of people. Douglas Colonel McGregor, who Trump hired at the very end of his first term, is excellent on all of these issues. And nobody is mistaken enough to think that Colonel Douglas McGregor is like a wimp or something like that, or wouldn't attack somebody or wouldn't respond if somebody attacked the United States of America. So I just don't see it. I don't think that keeping the war hawks around.
We'll have to see how it plays out. You're concerned about profligate war making, with these individuals. I see the upside of peace through strength, rebuilding strength. I hear you. You don't think we've been lacking in strength or in flexing our muscle. I think that we've lost a lot of I think we've lost a lot of credibility. However, that credibility is built on the world stage, particularly over the last 4 years. And I think, walk softly and carry a big stick. And when I hope Mike Waltz, I definitely think with Pete Hegseth, what we're building is a big stick. And Donald Trump's job is, although he's not necessarily a walk softly type guy, he has big words, but hopefully walks softly in wielding the weapon that is the United States military. You brought up Tulsi. You talk about the way the attacks are on her. You had a great moment the other night on Piers Morgan with Joe Walsh, who I don't know what he is. Used to be right. Now he's left. Used to be neocon. Now he's indistinguishable from... And it is fascinating, Dave. That's a separate conversation, how Bill Kristol all of a sudden becomes indistinguishable from Joy Reid. That something like that has happened with Joe Walsh. And here you are with Joe Walsh.
The argument is that there were a million off-ramps to the war in Ukraine, and that the West chose to not take any of them, and that this war could have been avoided, and it could have been negotiated away. Now, the idea that if someone makes this argument, your counter to that is to say that you're a Putin asset. This is so, first off, it's just despicable, and it's profoundly stupid. It makes absolutely no sense at all. So listen, at least during the original McCarthyism period, at least during the House Committee on American Activities, at least back then, there were some communists. Nobody is loyal to Vladimir Putin. This is the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
You're entitled. No, Tulsi Gabbard, of course, is entitled to her opinion as a citizen of this country. But if for 10 years your opinion is identical to Russian propaganda, we are entitled to question that. And someone like that,
you're saying nothing, and I'm entitled to make the point that that's the dumbest argument I've ever heard in my life.
You don't need the pat on the back. What you did so well there is listen to his words. That you're exactly right. To say someone is entitled to an opinion is saying nothing. That's not addressing the point. You're defaming her as a Russian asset, and as evidence, what that you point out they're offering up is some correlation between her points of view and someone in Russian power might share. You're saying, oh, because you might have an opinion that is correlated similarly, you've carried it all the way to you're an agent of Russia.
Yeah, it's just so ridiculous. And so then, like, okay, if we're gonna use that logic, then okay. I mean, I guess Donald Trump is an Israeli asset, and Joe Walsh is a Ukrainian asset, and like it doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's not an argument to say this foreign government agrees with you. And I get this all the time from people who will say like if you take one position, well, you agree with the social justice warrior leftists, or if you take another position, well, you agree with the white nationalists.
Or even worse, you are a social justice warrior. You have that one opinion that is correlated to something they have, not you agree, but to use the analogy directly to you are a Russian asset. Oh, Dave, now you are a social justice warrior.
Yeah, it'd be like if you were like, hey, I think Hitler was a really bad guy, and they were like, you're spreading Stalin propaganda. Like,
yeah, you're a Stalinist.
Well, okay, what? Like, I don't know. Stalin was right about that. He was wrong about a lot of other stuff, but that one was a good take. So what do you want? It's just, and it is. I mean, I was a little harsh, I guess, on Joe Walsh there, but it's just the thing is that it gets me angry because look, whatever criticisms you have of Tulsi Gabbard, and I have some, I don't agree with her on several different very important issues, but the woman served her country. I mean, she was embedded in a medical unit during the worst of the fighting in Iraq. So to come out and call her a traitor, it's just so despicable to me. And then to have for the argument to be so incredibly weak, like to make that type of accusation and back it up with absolutely nothing is just, it's so preposterous. And like, yeah, okay, I don't think I think we never should have had this war in Ukraine to begin with. And so, yeah, that's also what Putin, agrees with. But so what does that mean? What is the standard there? That doesn't mean I like Vladimir Putin or that I'm there's a million different areas, by the way, when he goes in the last 10 years, Tulsi Gabbard, everything she says is what Vladimir Putin. It's not true. There's a million. Look at her position on human rights, her position on a free press, her position on Israel, her position on a million different things are completely 180 degrees opposite of Vladimir Putin's. It's all just so dumb.
I wanted to ask you about this while I have you, Dave. This is a fascinating story. I hope you've seen it. It's from the Washington Times. It's just from yesterday. But it's a whistleblower who, within the FBI, and this is a new story. It's going to sound like you've heard this story before, but you haven't heard this story if you're watching or listening. And the reason it sounds like it is because they've done this more than once. But this is now a whistleblower suggesting that in 2016, James Comey directed the FBI to investigate Donald Trump with a honeypot scheme. Now, this is separate from, Russiagate and the Steele dossier and all of these different investigations in the FBI. This is early on. They planted, I think I understand a honeypot accurately, but they planted FBI agents or assets within the Trump campaign to try to draw him into different types of scandals to investigate him. And I think it was open-ended, Dave. I don't even think it was a focused investigation. It wasn't like, go look for him to see if there's a connection to Russia, go look for him for anything. It was an open-ended, let's put these honeypots. And by the way, I do think the definition of a honeypot, or the common application, was like women that you can kind of entice into different situations. But it's anything that attracts someone. You're trying to attract them to some type of wrongdoing. They did this before all that other stuff you've already heard, and it was directed by James Comey.
Yeah, and I will say that, not that I have like definitive proof of this, but the Trump Tower meeting that was such a big part of the early Russiagate nonsense certainly seemed to be a honeypot. And I don't know if that's true for sure, but it was like this Russian lady who basically told them she had dirt on Hillary Clinton and ended up meeting with all of them. And then she just didn't have anything, which, by the way, it would not be illegal to meet with a Russian who said they had information that might be useful to you. But then she had nothing, and it just did feel like, oh, they're trying to lure them into something so that they can use that as the groundwork for spying on the campaign or entrapping them into something. And look, listen, as crazy as this is, as wild as it would be that the FBI would be getting into domestic politics and trying to, damage the leading Republican candidate at the time, the thing that will always just remain the craziest to me is that you would imagine, if you had any last remaining vestige of belief in the American system, that even if you were going to cross that line, once he won and became the commander in chief, you'd have to stop, because that is now your boss. And you swore an oath to the Constitution like that. You can't. But they didn't stop, and they continued for at least the first 3 years of his administration. And then even kind of with the Hunter Biden thing, kind of brought it back by saying, oh, this is Russia interfering in the election again. Look, I know that there's a lot of people out there who get turned off by like the language of like retribution and stuff like that. But I do think that people need to be held accountable for this. And I'm not saying like the lowest level people, but the people who are higher up the food chain. Like this is, by maybe not treason by definition, but you truly did betray your country. I mean, like to try to be somebody in the intelligence apparatus and to be framing the sitting United States president for treason. For all of the people who called Donald Trump a dictator, it's like, a dictator would probably handle that situation in a slightly different way than just letting it go. But and I'm not calling for any type of like extrajudicial, justice, but these people should face trial. I mean, like people should go down for this, and for the COVID stuff too. I mean, it's just the level of corruption and lies and just pure evil is something that I don't think any healthy society can just tolerate and move on from.
Well, I don't think anything's happened since I've been walking the cotton fields of Alabama this morning, but I know there's been suspicion or suggestion that Kash Patel could be the next lead of the FBI. I don't think there's been a new one announced this morning. Again, I was literally picking cotton. But between whether or not it's Kash Patel or RFK, who you're a big fan of, as am I, by the way, on many of these issues, many of these issues. Honestly, Pete Hegseth at DOD, who promises real change in a lot of ways with entrenched interests inside the Pentagon, or Matt Gaetz at the Department of Justice. These people are not incremental change appointees. This is the potential for drastic change. It makes me wonder, this will be my last thing with you, Dave. Do you think that all of these individuals, or do you think there's one in particular, are not going to make it through the process. I mean, the big food lobby, the pharma lobby, these are powerful institutions in the United States that are going to be very opposed to RFK.
Yeah, I don't really know what the answer is to that, but I think you're absolutely right in the spirit of the question that this is not there. You already see people freaking out, but the thing is that what these guys all have in common is that they're outside of the corrupt machine. And in fact, they're very critical of the blatant corruption. But that means that they're a real threat. I mean, you're talking about, that when you're talking about the United States federal government, this is the biggest, most powerful entrenched interests in the history of the world. You're talking about, Ron Paul, the greatest living American hero. Ron Paul tweeted something the other day, or I guess he said it on his show, but he because Elon Musk was talking about cutting $2 trillion, and he goes, listen, that would be great, but you're going to make a lot of enemies if you try to cut $2 trillion. Yes. And that's something people should be prepared for. When Bobby Kennedy talks about rolling back the power of these big pharmaceutical companies who have the system completely rigged in their favor, you're talking about robbing people of hundreds of billions of dollars in profits. They're going to do everything in their power to fight back against that. And I don't know how these guys are going to do through their Senate confirmations, through the hearings. I would say that if we could ever get it done, right now's the time. I mean, Donald Trump just won in a dominant victory. The entire corporate media apparatus has been completely discredited. And he does have, I know they love using these term mandates, but he's got a mandate much more so than in 2016. And so now's the time. I think he's right to go for it with these picks, and we will see what happens.
All right, you get more of that, plus more of that feisty debate from Dave Smith at Part of the Problem podcast, as well as co-host of Legion of Skanks. He's also, maybe a second-tier comic. We want to go so far as Chris Cuomo. Not third tier, but maybe a second-tier comic. Love having you on the show. Thank you, Dave.
Thanks, Will. Appreciate it.
All right. When we come back, Indiana is undefeated. We might have a fight across the Mason-Dixon line because they may be having a debate against a two-loss team in Tennessee, Georgia, Ole Miss, maybe Texas. We got to sort out college football. Next on The Will Cain Show. Logjam in the South could soon engulf my Texas Longhorns. On the outside, undefeated Indiana. It's The Will Cain Show, streaming live at foxnews.com on the Fox News YouTube channel and the Fox News Facebook page. If you're on YouTube, drop into the comments section. You become a member of our community, a member of the Willisha. You can leave a comment. We bring you into the show. There's a poll question up right now, 2-a-days. You've been asking, you guys back in New York have asked the audience a question. What are you asking, and what are you getting back in an answer?
So the poll question we put up is, will Biden start World War III before Trump gets into office? And we have about 2,200 votes so far on it. And 62% say yes, he will. 38% say no, he won't.
I mean, that's a terrifying response from the audience. We have what? It's not quite yet December, so we have some time to go. Yeah. My only hope on that, before we transition to college football, is that Vladimir Putin and Zelensky both see the handwriting on the wall and see the inevitability, and that they won't be baited by any aggressive action from NATO, from Europe, from Joe Biden into some type of response that requires an unavoidable then response from the West. And I hope that they can see that, if not peace, negotiation is on the way. But it is incredibly suspect what's happening right now. It's incredibly suspect to be greenlighting long-range missiles into Russia. It's the type of thing that if this does go wrong, history books look back on this period in American history with not a jaundice, not a skeptical, but a damning eye towards Joe Biden. All right, let's talk on a lighter note about college football. Let me just go around the horn with you guys really quickly. There's a debate brewing. One of my old friends over at ESPN, Ryan Russillo, this is really going to upset Tinfoil Pat, I believe. One of my old friends, Ryan Russillo, is debating one of my other old friends, his former co-host, Danny Cannell, over Indiana. Ryan's argument is, look, man, and that's how he talks, by the way. That's a pretty good impression. Look, man.
Look, man.
I've watched college football. I see what I see. Indiana hasn't played anybody, and they don't look like Georgia. It is, though, a tough pill to swallow to say, here they are undefeated, and you like a 2-loss Tennessee, you like a 2-loss Ole Miss, you like a 2-loss Georgia over Indiana, and maybe we're talking about even at that point a 1-loss Indiana to Ohio State. They've got that game coming up. But I'm going to go to you, Tinfoil. I am so incoherent on this. I really am. Because on one hand, I'm like, oh, you play the games, you reward the resume. That's the only right way to do this. But I do think Ryan has a point. Like, Indiana has played 7 of the bottom 8 teams in the Big Ten. That's who they're winning against. The terrible teams in the Big Ten. And I think in the end, by the way, Ryan's argument is he hates these mega conferences and he hates the way this is gone because of the scheduling produces this, like, I don't know, it's apples and oranges comparison. You can't come to a just argument between Ole Miss and Indiana, Tinfoil.
I guess, I'm probably on Ryan's side on this one. I hate the idea of the mega conferences.
What?
I hate the idea of, like, I would go back even before BCS, blow it all up. You can't have more than 10 teams in a conference. Everything has to be regional within reason. So you can't have, like, SMU, ACC, or Stanford.
You're on Ryan's side when it comes to blowing up the conferences, but you're not on Ryan's side taking Georgia over Indiana, right? I mean, you are the most diehardest of diehards Florida State fans. You got left out over last year. There's no way you're leaving out Indiana.
No. I don't. But I don't even think the playoff should exist because we can't compare it the same. Like, it's apples and oranges. It's. I mean, like, if you look at Oregon, I mean, they don't have to play Oregon. They don't have to play. I mean, they're probably going to play Ohio State and lose. So we're not going to have this conversation anymore. But, like, I don't think we should.
Well, then it's a 1-loss, Indiana.
Still, I mean, like, I don't know. But Georgia hasn't looked great either. Like, Georgia had one big game against Texas, but, like, they've looked like dog crap all year long. So I mean, like, I don't know. I think a lot of it is SEC bias, but I would blow the whole thing up. I mean, this whole system's not working.
Why does the Mountain West get an automatic bid?
That's a group of 5. The Mountain West does not, but the group of 5 gets one automatic bid. The best team from the group of 5 conferences, it happens to be Boise State. I mean, there are some teams in real trouble here. I think the way this is shaken out, and those teams are teams like SMU, BYU. Your 1 loss can't take a second loss, obviously. Teams that are going to be measured up, perhaps Indiana if they lose to Ohio State. They're going to be measured up against these 2-loss SEC teams, by the way, which could include Texas. What I've been reading lately is there's so much, and I don't think this is completely fair, but skepticism towards Texas because of who they've played. I mean, Texas scheduled the defending national champion in Michigan. They had Georgia on their schedule. Now, who these teams turn out to be is difficult. And by the way, Texas's opponent's record is almost the same as Georgia's. It's almost identical. Now, I don't know about the BCS strength of schedule stuff, but their opponent's record is almost the same. But I'm reading two losses for Texas, and they may be out of the playoff.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, like, I don't know. I just feel like there's a lot of I side with Danny on this, that we should not be going and polling so early in the season, because now it's looking like every one of these SEC teams is beating up on each other, and it's just like good win over good after good win because, this team beat the other team when they were number 10, and so it gives a bigger strength of schedule. So we don't really know, who is good and who's not good because we're going off of early season polling, which really complicates
But imagine if it was a 4-team playoff, like this year, with this kind of parity. Like, that's not only is that not easier, that is more unjust. And, I mean, do you feel confident you can identify the 4 best teams in the country right now? Like, I don't think you can. Who are the 4 best teams? I mean, you give Oregon and Ohio State 2 of those bids right now, but then what? Texas for now, as they have one loss.
Texas.
But
Right.
it's difficult. It's difficult. And by the way, Dan, like, I think a one-loss Notre Dame is safe, but I mean, I forgot to mention them. And they've got brand power, but I mean, Notre Dame is not a guarantee for the playoff.
I disagree. I think they are. But as a Notre Dame fan, I also think there's way too much SEC bias going on, and that's just an unbiased opinion. And I'm saying also in the chat, Dragon Rider 77 says the same thing. So they agree with me. Someone's also saying UGA would smash every team outside the SEC besides possibly Ohio State and Oregon.
Correct.
I think that's true.
Yeah.
I mean,
you play the games on the field. You play the games on the field. Like you can't.
But we see what we see as well.
Because they have.
We know they're going to get walloped the second they get put against an SEC team. So, I mean, all right, if they're undefeated, give them a shot. But like at the end of the day, if
Patrick, right now, if Ole Miss played Miami, what do you think would happen?
I think Ole Miss probably has the edge, but that's why you play the games on the field. I mean, Miami's defense sucks.
Right.
It's terrible. But they have enough of an offense to make it a challenge. Just like FSU's. Like, so we lost our quarterback. We had an elite defense. We should have been given a shot, you know? That's all I'm saying.
And you gotta have a shot. I have a soft spot in my heart for them, but I don't know about SMU versus Tennessee. I actually feel better about SMU than I do Miami. I actually do.
Me too.
I think they're better than Miami.
That's interesting.
They have a better defense.
But okay, we need the SEC to beat up on itself. That's what we need. We need some 3 losses here is what we got to have happen. Because what do we have? 6 teams right now that are 1 or 2 losses? Is that what it is? 6 teams? And I don't know how many bids for the SEC. But, I mean, you could safely say 4, right? Are you going to throw a fit, Patrick, if it's 4 teams from the SEC?
I would.
You would?
Yeah. Heck yeah.
You don't think there's 4 teams from the SEC that are the 12 best teams in the country?
No.
Texas, Georgia, Alabama.
I don't know if Tennessee.
I don't think Georgia deserves to be in it. I mean, look, they just looked not undeserving. I don't know. They're not the Georgia of old. I think they should be out. I would be hard pressed to find 4 that I would really believe in.
The problem is they've all had this circular firing squad. It's like Georgia loses to Alabama and Ole Miss. Alabama lost to Tennessee. Ole Miss lost to some bad teams, but
and then you see them
lose. Who else did?
And then you see them play other teams, and you're like, oh yeah, the SEC is insane.
I think you're going to get 4 SEC teams. I think you need to prepare for that. What's up, James?
I would say at least 4 teams. I mean, this is all well and good, and we debate it. But if we go to the betting odds, there's only 5 football teams that are less than plus 1,000 to win the national championship, and everybody else is far behind. And it's Ohio State, Oregon, Georgia, Texas, Alabama. So if we're going by Vegas, those are the only 5 teams that are there. Maybe one of these teams sneaks in, but I don't see it. It's gonna be one of those 5 in January.
And the reason is, I mean, like the teams that are gonna win, they tend to have the highest blue chip ratio, which means that they have more 4- and 5-star players than everybody else. And the teams that, like SMU probably is not going to win if they get in a playoff. But they should be given that shot because they only have 1 loss and they're a pretty good team. I mean, like I don't think Tennessee's better, but
well, they control their destiny. That's the good thing for SMU, right? They control their destiny. I would like to see SMU. I would like to see Colorado. I think they're entertaining. I'd love to see Colorado get in as the Big 12 champion. And then I would like to see Notre Dame in there. I actually think you've earned it, Dan.
Yeah.
It's a good win against A&M. Mm-hmm. After that horrific loss, I think you have earned your way in. I don't know if you're going to get 2 ACC teams. You're not going to get 2 Big 12 teams, I don't think. You get Boise State, and then it's SEC and Big 10. That's what it should be. That's what I think. That is going to crown the most deserving national champion, and it's going to be the most entertaining product for everyone. And to bolster up James' point, last Friday's sports exclusive episode of the Will Cain Show had Andy Staples. Vegas does know what they're talking about when it comes to these odds and these betting lines. It's they've got their information there in Las Vegas. All right. I didn't issue one small correction today. It's past harvest season. The cotton's out of the field, but I picked cotton loose in the field today. So I didn't literally pick it out of the plant. But what an awesome experience to see, as a cotton farmer, how cotton makes its way to your clothes. Great conversation with Dave Smith today. We appreciate you being here. We hope you subscribe on Apple, Spotify. We'll see you again tomorrow, 12 o'clock Eastern Time, foxnews.com, Fox News YouTube channel, and the Fox News Facebook page.